Creative work involves many decisions. What to add or cut, expand or contract, heighten or diminish. Such decisions, in fact, decisions of any kind, whether part of a creative process or not, can be improved by the use of tools that we'll learn in this lecture. Think back to a major purchase, perhaps a car. How did you make that decision? If a car, can you identify and list the reasons why you bought that particular car? Did you consider price, fuel efficiency, reliability, performance, certain features, passenger capacity, storage space, and so forth? These are criteria. Criteria can help us to choose among the creative alternatives we create. It's common practice to use criteria. Criteria are standards for evaluating our choices. Most often, though, they remain implicit. In other words, we're not aware of our criteria, but they're there influencing us as we look at the choices before us. In this lecture, we move our criteria from implicit to a more explicit state, more visible, so that we can direct our choice by using these and leveraging these criteria. The tools in this lecture are advanced. They utilize criteria. The first tool is the evaluation matrix. The tool makes this natural process more formal and systematic, and therefore helps us to make better choices. It's also useful at developing our solutions. What's the benefit? Ever make a choice and then later discover that you weren't happy about it, that there were things you didn't like about it. In the evaluation matrix, there are 7 steps. The first step is to develop your criteria. We diverge on our criteria. And criteria answer the question, will it or does it? And you can include both tangible and intangible criteria, objective and subjective. And then afterwards, you select the most important criteria. In step 2, we have to check our criteria. We check them in 2 important ways. First of all, the criteria need to be distinct. In other words, there's no overlap. Will it fit my budget is too close to will it be affordable? They're too similar. Don't have one criterion be subsumed by another as well. They need to be independent from one another. We also need to make sure that they're positive. The criteria should point you in the direction of what you want, not what you don't want. So they should all go in the same direction. Will it make my spouse upset? Isn't probably what you want. It would be better to phrase that as, will it make my spouse happy? In the third step, we build our evaluation matrix. We place our criteria into the matrix, adding your choices in, the ideas or solutions that you wish to evaluate. So the spreadsheet has choices listed down the first column, then the criteria are listed across the top of the remaining columns. We then need to select an evaluation system. We decide on a system for rating these choices as we look at the criteria against each choice. We can use numbers, we can use number of stars, sort of like they use to evaluate restaurants. You can use smiley faces, etc. Some people find numbers easier. Those give them more meaning. Other, perhaps more visual learners, like to use symbols. In the 5th step, we evaluate our choices. When we evaluate our choices, we work down each criterion, rating each choice against that criterion. So in other words, we're holding that one standard against all options as we move through them. In step 6, we review the matrix. We look across our ratings. We don't total the numbers. Even if you may have used numbers, we don't total them or total the numbers of stars. When we do this, we might get locked into just the highest number. After we do this, we look across the evaluation. If we have a total, it draws our eye just to the total, and therefore we might miss some subtleties and chances, and we may miss the chance to improve, because the evaluation matrix is designed to also help us to improve. So once you look across these ratings, we make a decision to accept that option, to give it a green light, to modify it by looking at where it might be improved, where it might have fallen short against a criterion. Or if it doesn't do well against many criteria, we might decide to reject it. In the seventh step, we develop the options and we make our final decision. We see if options that were identified for improvement can indeed be improved. We refine these solutions and then we make our final decision. Here are some important tips when you use the evaluation matrix. First of all, remember to diverge on your criteria. You don't want to miss an important criterion, like a colleague of mine who went to purchase a new home and looked at 3 new homes, and he had his evaluation matrix, which he completed after every home. When it was all done and he sat down with his wife across from the kitchen table and said, "Look, it looks like home A is our choice and meets all of my criteria," well, there was something significant in what he said. They met his criteria. His wife sat there shaking her head no. And when he asked her what was wrong, she said, "The house just doesn't grab me." You see, he forgot an important criterion to include his wife's opinion. So we want to make sure we diverge on our criteria before we converge, so we don't miss any important criteria. Again, we need to be careful if you're using numbers not to add them. A total score may focus you in just on that number. And if one item has a score of 18 and another 17, that's probably not a significant difference. And again, we work down the columns rather than across, using a criterion as a constant reference point. So with this in mind, let's look at an example. Let's imagine that you're working for a company and you've decided to offer a new service program, and you need a software system to support this new service program. We're going to use that scenario to evaluate the different providers of these software systems. Here's what the matrix looks like with these options loaded in it. So we have the service providers, those who will provide the software system. We'll just call them Acme, ABC, Alpha, Beta, Omega, New Century, and Brand X. Those are our options. They're in the first column. Across the top, we fill in the criteria that we deemed most important. Will it fit our budget? Will this software system be user-friendly? Will it be compatible with our existing systems? Will it be something that we can customize so that it can fit well with this new service that we're providing? Will it be accessible to support services if we should run into problems? Once we've loaded our criteria in there, then we move down each column, beginning with the first criterion, will it fit our budget? Now, we've decided in this example to use a rating scale of 0 to 5, 0 being a poor fit, 3 being a good fit, and 5 being an excellent fit. So we assign a number based on how well that criterion fits the option. So Acme, let's say it's fairly expensive, may not really fit our budget. We assign a number of 1. ABC, their software system is particularly expensive. We give that a 0. Alpha, moderately expensive. We give it a 3. Beta, reasonably cost efficient. We might give it a 4. Omega, very cost efficient, a 5, and so forth. We complete that column. Once we've completed that column, we then move to user-friendly and work down the column in a similar fashion, assigning the number based on how well that criterion fits with the solution. When we're all done, we then make a decision. We have 3 options. We can apply, we can accept the solution as it is. In other words, it fared very well across the criteria. We can refine it by looking at perhaps where it fell short, where it didn't do so well against the criterion. And then if it didn't do so well against many criteria, again, we might just outright reject that solution. In our example, Omega did pretty well. So we might decide to say, well, that's acceptable to us. When we look at Beta, it fared pretty well also. But we noticed that there are a couple criteria for which if we could improve the solution, if we can improve that option in some way, it would also be acceptable. Beta didn't do so well on customizable. It got a 3. So perhaps we can contact the provider and see if we can negotiate some way to customize that software system. So we place that in the refined category, and we know which criterion we're going to go after in order to examine that solution further. Let's talk about the evaluation matrix. It's great for making explicit decisions, whether they are creative solutions or everyday decisions. They're good for when you need to go with one option, when you can't make a decision to use multiple solutions. It's simply one. It can be used for everyday decisions like purchasing a car, a home, a major appliance. It can be useful to help you choose a retirement community, a vacation spot, or a college. It's also helpful for those more creative options, making sure that those options meet your criteria that really describe your ideal state, like choosing a new career, deciding on what product to bring to the marketplace or what service to bring to the marketplace. Let me share with you a personal story in which I used the evaluation matrix, where I used criteria and it fundamentally changed my decision. In fact, it gave me the confidence to pursue a more novel, a riskier decision. When I was looking around for a doctoral program, I had been accepted into 3 universities. One was a local university, one was a university in the New York City area, and one was the University of Manchester overseas. Now, I hadn't done a lot of international travel up to that point, so I was a bit nervous about going overseas. That seemed so far away. And truthfully, my first choice was to go to the local university. My second choice was the university in New York City. And then going to the University of Manchester was my third choice. I gathered a group of friends to help me in this decision-making process, and together we generated criteria to evaluate the ideal university for my doctoral degree. We generated something like 200 criteria. They were a terrific resource group. I then went through these 200 criteria and I chose the criteria that were most important to me. And then something happened. My mind shifted completely. You see, when I looked across those criteria, many of the criteria I chose, in fact, the most important criteria for me had to do with continuing my interest in creativity, being able to further my research in the field of creativity. That was a huge shift, and it moved me in a riskier direction. You see, when I had visited the local university, I was told by the department chair that I would have to get over my interest in creativity when I went there to study. When I had met with the professors at the New York City University, they were interested in creativity, but they didn't have much domain knowledge. The only person of those 3 universities that I would study with that had expertise in the field of creativity was at the University of Manchester, which was initially my last choice. But by looking at my criteria, it made it obvious to me what my true desires were, and it gave me the confidence to pursue that riskier decision. Here's a twist on how you might use the evaluation matrix. You can sort your criteria into musts and wants. Must criteria are those criteria that are absolutely necessary in order for the choice to be acceptable. These are the deal breakers, the go, no-go criteria. Then we have our wants. These are important and they add value, or they make the option even more attractive. It can be awkward if you mix musts and wants in the evaluation matrix. Musts can be tough to rate. They can be either 0s or 5s if you're using a scale like that. Plus, why include options in the matrix if it doesn't meet a must? Must can serve as an initial screen to choose your short list of ideas that then go into the matrix. And then the matrix can be used to evaluate those choices based on the wants. So here's how this tool works, musts and wants. We generate our criteria. Next, we converge and sort those criteria into musts and wants. Next, we use the must to screen the ideas. In the fourth step, we place the converged ideas into the evaluation matrix. Only those ideas that met the musts go into our matrix where we have our wants. And we use our wants to then evaluate that short list. And then we evaluate and develop those solutions. So if we go back to our example where we're going to offer a new service to our customers and we need a software system to support that, we can apply this tool to that situation. And the net result is we end up with a shorter list of options that make it into our evaluation matrix. So in this example, let's say we identify our must criteria as follows. Will it be within our budget? Will it be compatible with the existing systems that we have? Will it be associated with a reputable vendor? So we take our ideas, we take our options, all of the vendors that we saw before, and we put them up against these must criteria. As a consequence, 3 options, 3 suppliers, 3 vendors survive. Let's call them alpha, beta, and omega. We then take those 3 options and we put them into our evaluation matrix in which we now have our wants. Our want criteria are, will IT, will information technology like it? Will it be user-friendly? Will it be visually appealing? Will it be customizable? Will there be accessible support services? We use a rating scale of 0 to 5, 0 being poor, 3 being good, 5 being excellent. We now take this much shorter list and we work through the evaluation matrix. Again, working down each column one at a time. So, alpha, will information technology, will our information technology department like it? We assign a 4. Beta, will IT like it? Oh, for sure, we give it a 5. Omega, not so much, we give it a 2. We then move to the next column and so forth. And at the end, just as before, we use this evaluation to help us make a decision. In this example, we decide that alpha doesn't cut muster, and we decide to reject it. Omega, the same. We decide to reject that as well. But the beta system seems to stand out in terms of these value-added want criteria. In the last lecture, we looked at design thinking tools specifically. Design thinking provides us with a slight twist, a variation of the evaluation matrix. In design thinking, remember, one of the principles is a user-centered focus. A user-centered focus. In their version, in the design thinking version of evaluation matrix, we use product and service to help us generate criteria, because ultimately the product needs to fit the producer's needs as well as the user's needs. So here are the differences between the evaluation matrix we learned earlier and the one that's often applied by design thinkers. Thinking like a designer, you have to satisfy 2 basic stakeholders. You have to be concerned about producing a product that delights the user and producing a product that the producer can create. The second is it's more visual. There are 6 steps to this matrix, or this evaluation tool. And it's called the solution evaluation and solution map. The solution evaluation piece looks much similar to the evaluation matrix that we did earlier. The solution map brings in the visual component, where we identify those ideas that do the best against those 2 sets of criteria, producer and user. So the first step is to create your user value and provider value criteria. We diverge on criteria in these 2 sets. For the users, we consider information gathered during our user research phase, that observation phase. User value criteria might be things like ease of use, easy to store, aesthetically pleasing. Producer value criteria might be things like, will it be profitable? Will it be easy for us to implement? Will it maintain our brand integrity? In the second step, we create a solution evaluation matrix. In a spreadsheet, the solutions are listed in the left column and the criteria across the top. But this time, the criteria are sorted into two areas: the user value criteria and the producer value categories. So as with the evaluation matrix we learned earlier, we use a spreadsheet to evaluate our options. But this spreadsheet is broken up. We have columns for criteria that are reserved for user value criteria, and we have columns that are reserved for producer value criteria. And in this case, we also have total columns, because the total columns allow us then to plot the options in the solution map later. So let's look at possible evaluation criteria in these two categories, and let's see how this would look. So user value criteria might be ease of use, ease of storage, and aesthetically pleasing. Producer value criteria might be profit, implementation. Will it be easy to implement the solution, the product or service, whatever it happens to be, and brand integrity. So now we take those criteria and we load them into this solution evaluation spreadsheet. Like before, we use each column, each criterion, and we work down, rating the solutions against that criterion. In this case, we'll use a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being low, it's a poor fit, 2 being a medium fit, and 3 being a very high, a very good fit. We start with our user value criteria. We begin with the criterion ease of use, and we work down comparing each solution against that criterion. When we're done with that criterion, we move to the next column. Will it be easy to store? And then we move to aesthetics. We total those 3 columns, and then we move to the producer value criteria, and we follow the same procedure, beginning with, will it be profitable? Do we believe that that solution will be profitable to the producer? Ease of implementation will be next, followed by brand integrity, and then we total those 3 columns. From here, we take these scores and we now plot them into a map. This is the visual part of this tool, which telegraphs to us which solutions are most promising to pursue. In this example, options 2, 5, and 6 end up above the diagonal line. These options had both high scores for producer value criteria and for user value criteria. All the other options end up below the diagonal line. So, what are some of the benefits of this tool, this design thinking approach to evaluating options? It explicitly takes stakeholders into account. You're specifically looking at end users, and you're also thinking about the producers. This is highly valuable because in order to sell the option, you need to be thinking about what's acceptable to them. It also gives us a visual representation of the evaluation of the solutions. But there's a watch out. Be careful not to get locked into the totals, missing the development of other really good ideas. This next tool is called targeting. The matrices are structured, they sort of feel objective, they're systematic. Targeting was developed with several goals in mind. To be a tool that was more visual, more intuitive, more fun, and more dynamic. It includes movement in it. Here's how targeting works. In fact, this is a tool I use pretty regularly. Imagine a large archery target. In fact, that's what I use when I go out and use targeting with groups. In this archery target, we have the bullseye, usually red. That bullseye represents our ideal outcome, the ideal solution, for example. And what we do is we want to see how close our options come to that bullseye, sort of like firing arrows at the target. The solutions are the arrows. And if the solution is really on target, then it'll end up on the bullseye. If it's not so much on target, then it'll end up in one of the outer rings. So here are the steps for targeting. We begin by defining the bullseye. What does that red zone in the center represent? Once we've defined the bullseye, we then take our options, our ideas or our solutions, we put them on Post-its, and in a way we fire them at the target. Locating them on the target relative to how close they come to hitting the bullseye. If the idea really comes close to capturing what we see the ideal solution to be, then that idea would end up on the bullseye. And then other ideas, if they're not so close to that ideal solution, end up in different location on the target. In step 3, we identify the pulls and pushes, those forces that pull the option in the direction of the bullseye, and those forces that repel it, that push it away. In step 4, we turn our pushes into challenges, much like as we did using the point tool where we identify issues. We transform the pushes into how-to, how might statements, what might. Because in step 5, we overcome the challenges. We generate ideas to address those pushes. And then we ask ourselves, if we can address this push, where does that now move that idea? Then you're able to relocate that post-it. If you were able to overcome that push, does it now move the idea all the way into the red zone, onto the bullseye? Or are there still some pushes that need to be addressed? At the end of this, we identify the key insights. As we look at where all the ideas end up, we make our decision, and then we move to the next step. Now, this can be used with groups as well. We begin by defining the bullseye as a group. We come to consensus in terms of what the ideal solution must be in order to truly work for us. Then we take each idea in turn. And rather than putting the idea on the post-it, we put the names of the group members on the post-it. And we do individual targets for each idea. So we have solution 1. We put everyone's name on a post-it, on individual post-its. And the group members represent by placing their post-it in space on the target relative to how close they see that option to being on the bullseye. And in this way, you can quickly look over the cluster of post-its to see if there's consensus or how close to being ideal that solution is. You identify the pulls and pushes, and in this way, you ask people to reveal publicly for themselves what pulled that idea towards the center, what pushed it away, and we create a chart of pulls and pushes. Then we repeat this for the next idea using another target, and then another target if we have a third option. After we've charted the pushes and pulls for each of those solutions that's being evaluated, we then look at ways to overcome those challenges, the pushes. Remember, we turn our pushes into challenge statements. And then we ask people to reposition their post-its based on whether the ideas generated to overcome the pushes help, according to them, according to their opinion, help to move that idea towards the center. We then identify the key insights in the next steps. Now, this tool can be used to evaluate solutions, and it can be used in other ways as well. How we think about the bullseye will vary depending on the application. So if we're using targeting to select one solution or to create a short list of solutions that you want to pursue, as we've just described, the question to help you to define the bullseye is, for the solution to be on target, it should. You can also use it to create a vision with a group. I've used it many times for this purpose. When you use it to create a vision, the phrase that helps you to define the bullseye is, the ideal vision would, you fill in the rest of that statement. It can also be used to evaluate performance against a goal. The bullseye, the center, representing the goal once it's been achieved. The statement that we use here to define the bullseye is, we know the goal has been achieved when, and you describe that end state when you've reached achievement. Let's think about targeting. What are some advantages to this tool? Well, it's an evaluative tool that's intuitive, visual, and kinesthetic. In terms of kinesthetic, I've seen it used where the target is laid down on the floor and people actually stand on the target relative to their opinions about whatever they're evaluating, and the facilitator guides a conversation. You can physically track progress as the solution is developed. As it's developed into the ideal outcome, you can literally see the solution moving as it's being developed. It tends to uncover deeply rooted barriers, and as a result of the analysis of the pulls and pushes, these forces, as we begin to think about these, tends to really uncover some deep obstacles. And it has multiple applications, from looking at a single option to competing options to using as a group or using individually. So we have many tools now with developing, but how do you choose which tool to use? Here are a couple ways to think about this. You can look at the number of options that you're evaluating. Point is good for a few options. You wouldn't want to do point on many options. It would be too time-consuming. It's useful for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 options. The evaluation matrix can handle roughly 12, 15 or so options. Hits and clustering that you learned earlier is terrific for whittling down a large set. You can combine hits and clustering with these other tools. You can do hits and clustering and then apply the point tool. You can mix and match the tools. Another way to think about which tool to use is the nature of the tool. Point tends to be more intuitive and subjective. Evaluation matrix tends to be more objective because we're using criteria. Foresight scenario is good for predicting the future, casting yourself into what possibilities there might be off in the future. And targeting is more visual. So you might want to think about the nature of the tool and how that fits with your needs or the purposes of the group. We added 4 development tools as a result of this lecture: evaluation matrix, must and want criteria, solution evaluation, and solution map. We also added in targeting. Adults learn best through practice. Before the next lecture, apply one of these tools. Tools take what is natural, using criteria, and makes them a bit more deliberate. And not just about making decisions. These tools are also useful in terms of developing solutions. So they help us to make decisions and also turn ideas into great solutions. Just like the superstar great creators do. They work and work and work to refine their solutions.